A man with no friends, standing in solitude, might feel as though he is incomplete. In a world where social media is flooded with the images of smiling faces, laughter shared, and connections that seem effortless, it can sometimes feel like something is deeply wrong when there is an absence of those relationships in our own lives. There are moments when the silence seems deafening, when the distance between ourselves and others feels impossible to bridge. You may look around and wonder why your phone never rings, why you don't have that circle of friends others seem to take for granted. The world, it seems, is full of connections, so why then does it feel like you are invisible, disconnected from others, and perhaps even from your own self? It is easy to believe that being alone, especially when we lack friendships, makes us somehow less than others. We live in a society that places tremendous value on social bonds, on friendships, on being known by others. The importance of connection is almost impossible to overstate. We are social creatures, meant to bond, to build relationships, to share our joys and struggles, to feel seen and understood. So when we find ourselves in a position where we feel isolated, whether by choice or by circumstance, it often leads to feelings of shame, unworthiness, and a deep sense of disconnection. But this perceived isolation is not an indication of our inability to form relationships, nor is it an indication that something is inherently wrong with us. The truth is, we live in a world that often pushes us to believe that relationships must come easily, that we should always be surrounded by people, and that we must constantly perform to be accepted and loved. However, real connection, the kind that goes deeper than surface-level pleasantries, requires something much more vulnerable. It is not born from perfection or the idea of having it all together, but from something much more raw, the courage to be seen, the courage to be vulnerable. There is immense power in vulnerability. This power is something that has the potential to transform not only the way we view ourselves, but also the way we interact with others. Vulnerability is not a weakness, as it is often perceived in a society that values strength and stoicism above all else. Vulnerability is actually the birthplace of connection, the entry point to intimacy, and the foundation of authentic relationships. It is through vulnerability that we allow others to see us, truly see us, not as the polished versions we often present to the world, but as our whole selves, complete with flaws, imperfections, and fears. When we take that step, when we let go of the walls we build around our hearts, we open the door to deeper connections. We stop hiding behind our masks of perfection and begin to show up as we truly are. And when we do that, we invite others to do the same. But let's pause here for a moment. If you are standing alone, questioning why you don't have friends, why you feel disconnected from others, I want you to know that this moment, this solitude, is not a punishment. It's an invitation to step into your own vulnerability. So often we shy away from that place of vulnerability because it feels uncomfortable, even terrifying. We fear judgment. We fear rejection. We fear being seen as flawed or inadequate. But the paradox is this: when we allow ourselves to be seen in our vulnerability, we create space for others to do the same. We give them permission to show up as their true selves, free of the masks they wear to fit in or please others. The journey of vulnerability starts with the willingness to be honest with ourselves. And this honesty is where the transformation happens. A man without friends might initially feel discouraged, isolated, even ashamed. He might look inward and feel like something is missing, as though his worth is somehow tied to his ability to maintain friendships. But here is where we must challenge that assumption. The truth is that our worth is not determined by the number of friends we have, or the presence of a social circle, or the amount of likes and followers we accumulate. Our worth is inherent. It is built into us, not based on external validation, but rooted in the very essence of who we are as human beings. We are worthy simply because we exist. This is a powerful realization, one that shifts the focus from needing others to validate us to discovering and accepting our own value. The moment we begin to understand this, we begin to break down the walls we have built around ourselves. We allow ourselves to feel the discomfort of loneliness, not as a signal of our inadequacy, but as an opportunity for self-reflection and growth. We no longer rely on others to give us the permission to be ourselves. Instead, we give ourselves that permission. The man with no friends might feel that he is in a place of lack, lacking companionship, support, and the joy of shared experiences. But what if, instead of viewing this time of solitude as a negative, he could see it as a gift? What if he could take this time not to dwell on the absence of others, but to learn to nurture his own soul? When we embrace our solitude, we open the door to self-discovery. We take the opportunity to reconnect with our own values, passions, and needs. We learn to spend time with ourselves, to be comfortable with our own company, and to discover the quiet strength that comes from standing alone. This time of solitude also allows us to become more aware of the kind of people we want to invite into our lives. When we have the space to reflect on who we are and what we truly need, we become clearer about the qualities we value in others. We stop seeking validation from those who don't align with our values, and instead we focus on cultivating relationships with those who see us, respect us, and appreciate us for who we are, unfiltered and real. True friendships are not built on the idea of perfection or superficial similarities. They are built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and the willingness to show up, even when life is messy. A friendship that endures is one that is anchored in authenticity. The beauty of true connection lies in the acceptance of each other's flaws, struggles, and imperfections. It's about showing up for each other, not when things are easy, but when things are hard. It's about sharing both the light and the dark parts of ourselves, and in doing so, we find that we are not as alone as we once thought. So, if you find yourself in a place where you feel like the man with no friends, I want to remind you that this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. This is the moment where you have the opportunity to shift the narrative. Instead of viewing your solitude as a curse, embrace it as an invitation to dive deeper into your own heart. Ask yourself, what do I really need? What do I value? What kind of relationships do I want to build in my life? And most importantly, how can I show up as the kind of friend I hope to have? Sometimes we believe that we must have everything figured out before we can show up for others. We think we need to be in a place of perfection before we can form connections. But the truth is, we form the strongest relationships when we are willing to show up as we are, not as a finished product, but as a work in progress. The key to vulnerability is not about having everything together, but about being willing to admit that we don't. It's about reaching out and saying, I need you and I am here for you. That raw, honest sharing is the foundation of true friendship. But let's talk about something else that often stands in the way of connection: fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood. These fears can keep us trapped in isolation, preventing us from taking the first step toward forming meaningful relationships. But I want to challenge you to look at those fears not as barriers, but as guides. They show us where we need to lean into vulnerability. They reveal the areas where we need to grow, to heal, and to trust. The fear of being rejected is natural, but it doesn't have to control us. It can be the very thing that pushes us to take the risk of being seen. And when we take that risk, when we allow ourselves to show up, imperfections and all, we often find that others are more than willing to meet us there. We attract the kind of people who are also willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to risk being seen and understood. And in that space, the magic of true connection happens. The man with no friends may feel that he is lacking, but he is actually in a place of great potential. The absence of friendships is not a reflection of his worth. It's an invitation to rediscover who he is, to find strength in his solitude, and to open himself up to the kind of connections that will sustain him for a lifetime. It's in the willingness to be vulnerable, to show up as we are, and to embrace our imperfections that we find the relationships that truly matter. So, if you are standing in that place of loneliness, I want to encourage you. Take the first step, embrace the discomfort, lean into the vulnerability, and remember that the connections you seek are waiting for you, not in the perfection of what you think you should be, but in the authenticity of who you already are. You are worthy, you are enough, and the friends you are meant to have will come when you let go of the illusion of perfection and show up just as you are. In a world that often celebrates perfection, whether in our appearance, our work, or the relationships we form, it can be easy to fall into the trap of believing that the most valuable friendships are those that are seamless, without conflict, and without imperfection. We are constantly shown images of flawless relationships on social media, and we hear people talk about their friendships as though everything is always smooth sailing. We may find ourselves longing for this kind of relationship, wishing that we could just get it right and find the perfect friend, the perfect connection. But the truth is, perfection does not exist. Not in relationships, and certainly not in people. What truly makes relationships rich, meaningful, and enduring is not perfection. It is the willingness to embrace imperfection, both in ourselves and in the people we call our friends. It's tempting, especially in today's world, to craft an image of ourselves that we believe will be accepted by others. We strive to present a polished version of who we are, the one that aligns with societal standards, the one that hides the parts of ourselves we fear might be unlovable. We wear the mask of perfection, hoping that others will admire us, hoping that we'll fit in, and perhaps hoping that we'll finally feel enough. But what if this version of ourselves, the one that hides all the messiness, all the flaws, and all the imperfections, is not the version that leads to the deepest, most fulfilling relationships? What if the version of us that we hide away is actually the one that is most capable of forming authentic, lasting bonds with others? Embracing imperfection is not about lowering our standards or allowing ourselves to settle for less than we deserve. It is not about accepting toxic behavior or unhealthy dynamics. Rather, it is about recognizing that true connection comes from showing up in our raw, unfiltered state, fully aware of our flaws, our vulnerabilities, and our humanness. It is about acknowledging that we are all works in progress, and that it is in our imperfections that the real beauty of relationships is found. When we stop expecting perfection from ourselves and others, we free ourselves from the pressure of trying to be something we're not. We give ourselves permission to be real, and in doing so, we create space for others to do the same. The pursuit of perfection in relationships often stems from a desire to avoid conflict and discomfort. We think that if we are perfect, if we avoid mistakes, if we say the right things, if we never hurt anyone's feelings, we will be safe. But this desire for safety often results in emotional isolation. We hide parts of ourselves, we suppress our true feelings, and we deny the reality that we, too, have flaws. The irony is that in trying to create perfect relationships, we often distance ourselves from the very thing that makes relationships meaningful: our authenticity.